So I am dialing in from the Alling House, Alling, here in Orange City, Florida. We're down here for the Orlando event this coming Friday. We do have a couple of slots left if you'd like to get into the Orlando boot camp. It's too late to get labs. You can get them after the fact, and we can go over them with you after that. But Janice's mother lives here in John Knox Village in Orange City. So Janice is over visiting her mom, and I'm here doing this YouTube live. Today I'm going to share what happened yesterday. I fell off the wagon. That's the bottom line. We stopped today in St. Augustine, and one of my favorite restaurants in the world is there. It's the Columbia restaurant. And I was doing well until they brought out that Spanish bread. And then Janice ordered the dessert, and then it just went south on me. I'm digging back out of a hole, but I'll describe some of that today. Sugar does appear to be an addiction. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So I'm going to share my falling off the wagon on my sweets addiction. I've shared some of that in the past and continues to have struggles. Now, first of all, apologies to the webinar crowd. We did miss our second event for the second series yesterday. That was due to a miscommunication regarding travel plans. I thought we had rescheduled it. Evidently, Clyde didn't get the message. We tried to go ahead and set it up anyway, but we didn't have, because of the travel, we didn't have a hotel set up where I could do that. We do have it set up for next Tuesday, March 3rd. For the Democrats in the House, I think that's Super Tuesday, and I think that's only a Democratic thing. My wife, Janice, is a Democrat. I'm apolitical. But because of her interests, I have to sometimes sit and watch the debates. So next Tuesday, March 3rd at 11 a.m. Is that right, Clyde?
Yes, Doc, that is correct.
Okay, great, thanks. Now we are getting a lot of great reviews on the webinars. And here's part of the reason. Pardon the noise in the background, that's our friend. These are not webinars. You know, with most webinars on the internet, somebody's trying to sell you something. We're not trying to sell you something, we're trying to tell you something. Basically what we do is we get labs for webinar attendees. We allow webinar attendees, when you sign up, you can get you get a lab requisition slip, so you can go to your local lab, use our pricing. Now, we cannot guarantee the performance of your local lab draw site. That is a recurring nightmare. Those of you who've been there, who've done that, I think many of you already know what I mean. But what we do is we get inflammation tests, an inflammation panel. This is mine here. We get an OGTT, and we get insulin response. And as you see, this is one of our patients who had said, yeah, my doc said my glucose was fine, and I don't have insulin resistance. I've got full-blown diabetes. Then we have others, for example, who have pretty good numbers for their glucose, but then find out that they're having to push their insulin way over 100 just to keep their glucose down. So that's also insulin resistance as well. And these are critical numbers to be aware of. If you're like Joseph Kraft in his book, The Diabetes Epidemic and You, I think the subtitle is something like, "This only matters if you care about your health." Again, number one cause, by far, hands down, a bigger cause than everything else put together for heart attack, stroke, dementia, chronic diseases, the diseases that are killing and maiming us. So again, if you'd like to to get in on one of those last slots for the Orlando event, this is how to do it. You can call Clyde at 859-721-1414. That's 859-721-1414. And today's event, my sweets addiction and my experience falling off the wagon. What started off as a little bit of a diet vacation turned into a day of dietary debauchery. We'll cover a little bit about monk fruit on that. We've had a couple of questions about monk fruit in the past. I panned it, and in reality, it's not so bad. So let's go to the presentation for today. This comes from an image you can find easily on the internet. There are a lot of images where they took functional MRI and some other types of imaging, I think some PET scans, where they compared the brains of people taking cocaine and sugar. And as you can see here, the sugar is actually brighter than the cocaine. Now, I don't think any of us believe that sugar is as destructive as cocaine, but it's pretty destructive. And on a population basis, I'm sure there are people that might debate that. But then you might say, well, okay, that's sugar, that's something different. We've got plenty of sweeteners like stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, and those aren't nearly as bad, right? Well, I looked this up. Diet Doctor. If you haven't been there, it's a great website. He's got some sort of membership and that I don't understand completely yet, but he's got a good article here where this was the first time a couple of months ago that I had seen this. Basically what they did was they took all of the artificial sweeteners and other types of sweeteners and sugar and rated them less bad to worse. Now, why would you say less bad? There have been a couple of things that have been taken off the market. Saccharin, I believe, was taken off the market. Was it back in 2004? Maybe even a little bit before that. Then a couple of years later, it's put back on the market. Here was why. They said, saccharin causes bladder cancer. They found that in mice, laboratory models. So they said, we're going to have to take this off. Then they started looking more deeply. And they started finding, look, in order to, for a human to get the same dose of saccharin that was causing cancer in mice, the human would have to drink, I believe it was like 800 diet sodas every day. So at that point, there were not a lot of other options. The FDA then, a couple of years later, took saccharin back off of the banned list. There are now a lot of other options, many that appear to be a lot healthier. But again, you got to ask the question, why would people label stevia, monk fruit, erythritol as less bad rather than just good? I mean, people have had diabetes, known diabetes for a long time, and there's been a lot of use of these things. Well, as you know, there are studies which would indicate there's clearly some associations with obesity, with weight gain. If you go to Harvard Health, they talk about, they interview David Ludwig. He's the head of the obesity unit there. He wrote the book, Always Hungry. And he's done some of the cutting edge research on carbs and the dangers associated with eating carbs. He's an endocrinologist like Robert Lustig, who's the head of an obesity unit on the other coast and has written several books about this. So let's go back then and say, well, is there evidence that that the non-nutritive sweeteners, the non-sugar sweeteners are addictive? Well, yes, there are. If you this was done with lab rats, and they compared saccharin to cocaine. And what this line means is this: when the lab rats became addicted to these two things, the sweets from saccharin and the cocaine, if they had a choice between the two, they chose saccharin over cocaine. So again, I'm not here to debate which is worse, a cocaine addiction or a sweets addiction. I am here to say, though, that there are clearly components of addictions. We just wrote a blog on that. Clyde, I don't know if we've posted that blog or not. Do you?
Which blog, Doc?
I know we're just getting started with a blog for those of us who are listening, and we've recently done.
We've got 3 blogs on our website. We've got 3 blogs on our website already. I mean,
okay, yeah. Great. So one of them is the definitions, the list of definitions in our space, in our science.
Yep.
What are the other 2?
The other 2, we have the vitamin K2. What is it? Can it remove your plaque? And the other one is, can you reverse plaque? I did. Here's how.
Okay, great. So we plan to get a few more blogs up and rolling. We have not done that in the past. If you look at our website in the past, it's what professionals in the area would call a brochure website. Now we're looking to develop some content, leave it there for folks who are interested. We should place post the blog about sweets addiction that covers some of these areas as soon as we can, Clyde. If you'd let Chris know. Absolutely, Doc. Okay. Now, I was hoping today to be able to talk about my progress on my own sweets addiction. As I have mentioned a few times, I'm 62 years old and have struggled with sweets addiction. Actually didn't struggle that much with it, just had some addiction and didn't mind it for many, many years. It's just been over the past 4 or 5 years that I've tried to back away from this. I've gotten more success with this item than anything else. It's called Gymnema sylvestre. It's an ancient Ayurvedic supplement used a lot in India, Sri Lanka, Africa, used for diabetes to help people deal with sweets addiction. It's a climbing vine. It's also called Australian cow plant. The herb is the crushed leaves, as you see in the picture on the right. I get it from Amazon, as you see in the picture on the bottom. The fruit itself is called miracle plant, and again, the term I think the term Gymnema is related to a Hindi term that's called sugar, that means sugar destroyer. What it does is it blocks receptors for sweetness on the tongue, which are in the back of the tongue and the back of the palate. It also actually blocks sugar receptors in the intestines. Okay, so unfortunately, like I said, I was hoping to report on some progress I'd made. For the past week or so, we've been at Kiowa. We have a place in Charleston, South Carolina, where I went to med school. And on our way down to the event in Orlando, we stopped at St. Augustine, one of our favorite towns on the East Coast. There's an old town called there's a street called St. George. This is, again, the oldest, I believe it's credited for being the oldest town in North America. It's got a beautiful fort here called Fort San Marcos, and it's got a wonderful restaurant, one of my favorites in the country. It's called Columbia. The Columbia restaurant started in Tampa. This is a picture when it started back in 1905. My favorite dish is actually a really good dish. It's the 1905 salad. Here's a picture of it. It's got iceberg lettuce, Swiss cheese, garlic dressing, mostly made with olive oil, some Worcester sauce, ham, tomato, olives, lemon, and Romano. So I was doing good at that point. I I took a little bit of a dietary vacation the first couple of days in Charleston, then got back on my diet. Did not eat breakfast this morning, was doing a closed eating window. So I was pretty hungry by the time we got there. And then sitting on the table, they have this wonderful Spanish bread. I had a little bit of the crust. That's what I usually eat. And was still doing okay until after the meal. And Janice ordered churros, and they have a dark chocolate dip for the churros. So there I went. Wasn't planning on doing that. And you could feel those. I could personally, it felt like I could feel those receptors going off in my brain with those sweets. There's not one, but two Kilwins within a 3-block area on St. George Street in St. Augustine. And yeah, I said, you know what? I think I'm just going to get a taste, and then I'll throw the rest of it out. And in the past, I've been able to do that. But again, with my hunger on not having eaten breakfast, and then I haven't had sweets in a couple of weeks, it was like, oh gosh, you know, I used to do some addiction work with AA and some addiction work back at Hopkins when I was doing a lot of HIV work. And one of the things I remember is that addicts, some of the research showed that addicts are fine until they get around what they're addicted to. And especially until when they first get a taste of it, it's like all that pent up stuff, desire. So then I said, okay, you know what? I fell off the wagon for lunch. I'm not going to do that for dinner. I did it again for dinner. So, you know, then I said, okay, darn it, I'm going to get back. No sweets for breakfast. Well, I didn't have breakfast, but I did. That coffee didn't taste so good, so I ended up adding a little sweetener to that. I'll get back there. But it's a struggle. Janice, I was talking about this on the way down to the hotel this morning to get set up for the event this morning. And Janice, you know, she's our health coach. So she started saying, well, why didn't you just stop at the chocolate strawberry, which I didn't mention, by the way. Or why didn't you stop with one taste of churros? And it's like, well, Janice, you've never had this kind of addiction. How would you know why I couldn't stop? Well, why didn't you just test your blood sugar? Why didn't you have a Libre on so you could see what it was doing to your blood sugar? Well, I didn't have one of those. And again, we tend to do that in healthcare. We tend to start saying, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Meanwhile, those of us who struggle with different types of food addictions are over there feeling bad enough already. And it's like, don't want to hear that. I will dig back out of my hole and get back on track, on the wagon. But sometimes you just need to think through it. Sometimes you need to just listen as a healthcare provider, not try to tell somebody what to do. And by the way, Janice is better at that than me, maybe just not so much with her husband. Anyhow, as healthcare providers, sometimes the best thing to do is to listen, help someone as they work through their health behavior challenges. Let the patient walk through what works for them. And again, Janice is one of the world's best at that space. So thank you for your interest. I think that takes us out of my story on my sweets addiction and falling and trying to dig back out. Not trying to know I will. I've been there before. In terms of learning resources, Clyde, I did want to ask you if you would share with the group a little bit more about what's going on with the webinars.
Oh, yeah.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
Doc. Yeah. Well, we here at PrevMed.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, we're doing a lot of things with PrevMed, and one of them are some changes to our webinar series. We have received a lot of positive feedback about our webinar series, actually, and We're currently working on making it more scalable. We've started doing the webinar series, probably around October, November last year. And so
Hmm.
far it has been well accepted. The second series had 50% more attendees, and well, the downside though is the current process is that people had to wait for a couple of weeks for to join the event. I mean, the live webinar. So what
Yeah,
we've
that was
done,
a
yeah,
technical problem that
yes,
we're working on right now, to
yeah,
where instead of having to schedule one webinar each month for 3 months, we're looking to make it much more available.
accessible. Yeah. So what we've done is work on some evergreen webinars so people can start learning right after they register. And yes, it will still include the labs and of course the live Q&A with you. And not only that, we will have different topics included in the webinar series. And yeah, I'm excited and thrilled to get it completed.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Um, and any, actually, I don't know this yet either. You've been working with the team on getting some of those things ready. Any idea when the next series will be available?
We're still working on it. I don't have a timeline yet, Doc, but I'll definitely let you know and definitely let everyone know. We'll probably send email to everyone once we have the schedules.
One of the other things I will share with the group is that we've had a lot of people getting CIMTs. They're using the CIMT. For example, at events like this, you get your CIMT, but you can also I'm there at these events, the boot camp type of events, and I can help you interpret them there. A lot of people are getting them through cardiorisk.us/forward. And we're working on developing webinars for CIMT. David has started asking me if I will call and go over the CIMT results for people that have attended his events. So basically what we're looking to do there is set up a webinar program for CIMT where people, when they get their CIMT, can join this webinar program to, number one, find out where they fit in relation to others. And number two, just learn how to interpret their results, find out what others are doing with their results as well. Clyde, any statement about when that CIMT webinar will be available?
We're working on it, Doc. It will probably be available the next month.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. So let's go over. We've got a lot of attendees, a lot of comments here. Let's go through some of them. Bart Robinson, on board and ready to go, Doc. Very good. Thanks, Bart. Good to hear from you. Bob Weiss, good morning from North Georgia mountains. Good morning. Amir Al-Gayer, I'm going to have to put my hello from Germany. Well, I think that might be our first, at least the first comment I can remember from Germany. Thank you for making us aware. Then we've got James Brown from San Jose. Is that San Jose, California, or somewhere else? Terry Dukes, howdy. James Brown, how can you be apolitical in these times? I'm not apolitical. Actually, I lean way libertarian. I think our government's too deep into too much of our lifestyle. I understand that we have to do taxes for things like roads. Again, this is not a political channel. I probably shouldn't have even brought it up. Freedom Deep, good morning. Marcos Galvao, that sounds Brazilian or Portuguese. Make video about COVID-19. I have been tempted to make a video about COVID-19. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's the official name for the coronavirus. Here's why I haven't yet. I've been very interested in it. And in fact, Janice and I had a trip planned to China. We planned that trip about 8 months ago. Wuhan was going to be one of the stops that we had planned. It was supposed to be March. It was supposed to be about 2 weeks from now. Obviously, that trip has been canceled. So very interested in COVID-19. But let me just ask a couple of questions. How many of us in America have died today from COVID-19? Okay, so we've been on, it's 11:23 right now. We've been on 23 minutes, maybe 24, because we started a couple of minutes earlier. So that means in the US alone, not in Germany, not in any of the other countries, Brazil, other places Australia, other places where we have people watching. In that 24 minutes in the US alone, we've had 48 people have a heart attack. Half of those died. So we've had 24 people die in the 24 minutes that we've been on. So the other thing is, in those 24 minutes, we've also had 6 people in the US have a stroke. And about a quarter of those people have significant permanent disability. So 1 to 2 of those people have had significantly permanently disabling stroke. So yes, I'm excited about COVID-19. It's impacted my own life, but we're getting the equivalent of a Vietnam War in terms of deaths every 2 weeks from heart attack and stroke, from the processes that we're talking about. Again, the vast majority of it associated with people having too high blood sugar and inflammation associated with it. So yes, again, very interested in coronavirus and very interested in the whole science of how the flu viruses each year, for the most part, have tended to come from China. And there's SARS was a coronavirus, very interesting transmission from other animals through other animal species to humans, quite often associated with these wet markets, eating meat from animals that, wild animals. So, interesting point. Bambi Grage. There's a Bambi Abel as well. Bambi, you didn't change your YouTube moniker, did you? Good morning from Crescent City, California. Mike Martyr, hi from Virginia, addicted to bread, which is a worse glycemic load. Thank you for bringing that up, Mike. For the longest time before I got into this, you know, for what, almost 30 years, I was more focused on low fat, because we all were during that time period. It's only been the past 10 years or so that we've begun to see the science associated with glucose, with glycemics. And so I thought that sugar was fine. I thought that sugar substitutes were fine, because we'd had so many diabetics who weren't being wiped out by sugar substitutes. They were being wiped out by heart attack and stroke. And one of the things that I knew from the beginning that there was a higher carb load with bread, but I thought that bread was a very safe alternative for a long time. Again, only the past 5 to 10 years have we begun to understand the dangers associated with how many people, how prevalent it is to have pre-diabetic levels of blood sugar problems. And as you talk through this, most people think it's sugar that they need to avoid. A lot of people don't know that you get a much higher load from grains, much higher glycemic load from carbs. Not sure what happened there. Much higher glycemic load from carbs and from breads. So I did have a bread addiction as well. It didn't, the bread addiction though, didn't seem to just get my brain going like sweets do. So again, thanks Mike for sharing that. Freedom Deep, Yes, Mike, me too. Bread is my kryptonite. Old Alabama Gardener, how you doing, OAG? Habib Basit, hello. Hello, Habib. Mike Martyr, cast iron gut, Russian blood means 4,000 years. Some grain, okay. My favorite is diet bread, which I mix eggs and a bunch of psyllium husk to increase fiber, double the carb load. Diet sugar-free syrup. Interesting. Freedom Deep, OAG, howdy. Not sure how my gut bacteria is, but I take probiotics and supplements. I do try to cut back on carbs. Mike Martyr, take Lipitor, metformin, berberine, and morning blood sugar first time under 100. Well, congratulations for getting a much better morning blood sugar level. Robert Sorzano, good day all. Robert Sorzano from Trinidad and Tobago. Good day to you as well. And absolutely, we've had 2 or 3 firsts today. Clearly Trinidad and Tobago, clearly Germany, and maybe even San Jose, unless it was San Jose, California. Mike Martyr, Gymnema only empties my wallet because I am structured and a recluse and a control freak. Well, sorry to hear that. Mike Martyr, hello, Dr. Brewer. Mike Martyr, Carboholic. Paul Steele, TB. Freedom Deep, what do you recommend, OJ? Thanks for being honest. Congratulations on the blood sugar level. When I have a Prolon nut bar, this is Robert Pinsky. Good morning, Robert. When I have a Prolon nut bar, my glucose doesn't change much. Maybe goes up a point or 2. It's a great point, Robert. Here's what happens with me with Prolon. I've done it several times, and I don't do it as much as I used to because I started monitoring my blood sugar when I did Prolon. The Prolon teas, which had, oh gosh, they had another sweetener. It was an old school sweetener. Gosh, somebody fact check, remind me of the name of that sweetener. It's a lubricant. It's a vegetable lubricant. And it's not as popular as the others that we mentioned. That doesn't bother my blood sugar, and neither did the nut bars. Here's what caused problems for my blood sugar: the soups, the tomato soup and the vegetable soup. We'll say, well, that's not really the same thing, Brewer, because avocados have fat, and Walter Longo's formula is to decrease fats, decrease amino acids, and so therefore you have to get a few carbs. Again, I understand that. I occasionally will still do a Prolon every quarter or so. Every couple of weeks, every week, I fluctuate in terms of doing a day or 2 of just plain old-fashioned water fasting. That is actually how that was actually what Walter Longo was doing when he set up and developed the formula for Prolon anyway. It's fasting mimicking. So he was trying to set up something, and he said, look, the health benefits of water fasting are just incontrovertible. There's no question about it. But number 1, water fasting is uncomfortable. Number 2, we were working on developing a fasting system for people that had cancer. Well, if somebody's had cancer, they're getting radiation, they're getting chemo, and you want to tell them and their oncologist, we need to get them fasting, they just look at you cross-eyed. So they think you're crazy. So what he was doing was looking for a way to trick the body into thinking that it was doing fasting. So if you can do regular old water fasting, you don't have to worry about trying to develop different components for your own Prolon diet. It's great. I appreciate, Robert, you bringing up the part about the Prolon nut bar and the Prolon diet. Okay, D. Crispin, as sugar addicted as you, just have to avoid it or I'm in for a bad ride. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's amazing. I don't know if you're noticing this, but whenever I talk about this, it is amazing the number of sugar addicts that come out of the closet. My BJJ, well, again, the comments adjusted on me and having a hard time finding where we were. My BJJ, you indicated in a podcast that you've seen arterial inflammation calm down in high Lp(a) patients when put on niacin. Are you seeing Lp(PLA2) and CRP reduced? Yes, we do. Niacin does tend to help. What about CIMT reduction? Thank you. So yes, thank you, my BJJ. I'm guessing that either you or somebody you know has Lp(a). Thanks for bringing it up. It's interesting and it's a big topic. For those of you who don't know what Lp(a) is, it's a genetic variation of LDL. When you go back, it's a known risk for heart attack and stroke. It's not totally clear why, but there's some suspicions about. Actually, there's some science in it. The way that Lp(a) is set up, it tends to attract and hold oxidized LDL. There's a little hook that hangs off of the LDL and Lp(a) that's made up of what we call Kringle repeats. And there's been some suggestions and thoughts that maybe that hook helped hook up the Lp(a) particle to the endothelium or the intima. No matter what's causing it, the reality is that it's a big deal for heart attack and stroke. The other reality is that, like 9p21, it is very common. Depending on the cut point you use for having high Lp(a), you get 25 to 33% prevalence of Lp(a). Now, there is no known accepted treatment for Lp(a). It has been demonstrated that niacin actually decreases Lp(a), and I do use that niacin. As you can imagine, I get some people with world-class levels of Lp(a). There's a gene pool of French Canadians that have numbers up around 500, 400 and 500 or more. Your typical person with high Lp(a) is somebody in the 150s, 160s. These people that have them 400 and 500 and above tend to get calcification of the aortic valve. We had one of our patients actually shared his case. He had a Lp(a) number like over 800 or 900. Had the aortic valve surgery and ended up with some really good numbers. Also appeared to have some FH as well, familial hypercholesterolemia. Now, one other thing I'll say before I move off the Lp(a) topic. There was some research, I think it was funded by Merck, over a decade ago, and they were hoping to really clean up on Lp(a). They put lapropiant in it. Lapropiant is a chemical that stops the burning. For those of you who have taken niacin before, you know that niacin can cause some very significant flush, burning, rash. Your skin turns red. I remember trying it a couple of decades ago, and it felt like I was being scalped alive. It was awful, and so I quit taking it. Lapropiant stopped all that. Unfortunately, lapropiant also appeared to stop the benefit of Lp(a). I mean, the benefit of the niacin on the Lp(a). So the Americans read that and said, you know what, Lp(a), this isn't helped. Niacin doesn't help. I've done a video where I went back and And there's an archaic little video hidden somewhere on YouTube. I happened to find it. It was done by the principal investigator of I believe it was either the AIM High study, where they showed this. And he said, unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to see this study and think that niacin doesn't work. So prescient, how prescient that was. He predicted it, and that's what happened. Niacin actually even fell off of the recommendations in America. The Europeans did not read it that way. I don't read it that way either, and do use niacin. Do recommend niacin with my Lp(a) patients, and have seen some really good results. Now, actually, I said that was going to be the last series of comments I made on Lp(a). I do have to add another. Just a month ago, I covered an article in the New England Journal, maybe December, where they're actually doing the studies, getting the results back on the antisense drugs. The antisense drugs are drugs where it's a high-tech genetic thing where basically you translate from DNA to RNA. The antisense drugs actually are made to fit lock and key, antisense for the genetic material. Don't remember if it was on the DNA or the RNA piece, but when they do that, they block that out and neutralize the Lp(a). They are getting some incredible results with those. So based on that, we've got a lot of people saying, okay, can I get in the study or can I get those antisense medications? They're not ready for prime time yet. I did have a patient send me a list of places where you could request to be in the study. I'm still late getting some of that out. There's again, a lot of good breaking news on that. Last comment I'll make that may remind some people about Lp(a), people that don't have it and were not aware of it. Bob Harper, The Biggest Loser. He was relatively young, early 50s. Everybody, he was a celebrity because of the work that he did for staying in shape. He had a heart attack a couple of years ago, and then announced that, yeah, I have Lp(a). And so that started a lot of the more recent work that's coming out about Lp(a). So thank you for bringing it up, my BJJ. I hope that helped. David Ridlin, I feel your shame when I ate one little bite of pasta. Feel like I woke up with crackhead in a seedy motel. Me too. And actually, I'm glad you brought up the issue of shame, because when Janice was doing her trial of coaching me on my little episode of debauchery, she and I both started talking about this issue of shame. And my first comment with her was, well, I don't really feel shame. I'm a little bit frustrated because I went farther than I went. And then I said, yeah, you know what? I guess I do feel shame. Her point was, whether you feel it or not, Ford, a lot of people do. I mean, you break down what you had planned in terms of your willpower. And you may want to just acknowledge that, a lot of people do feel shame with it. Another thing regarding this whole shame issue, I've met some coaches and I have learned from coaches, maybe even not even call it a cheat day. You hear that term often. Oh, well, I had a cheat day. Well, some coaches, and I would agree. I mean, I'm okay with whatever helps you work through your own behavioral stuff, just like I'm working through mine. But I would say, that I guess it ended up as a cheat day. I tend to not call them cheat days. I call them vacations. I was on a vacation day, and I've been on vacation days before, and I'm comfortable that I'll pull back out of it. Sometimes it takes a few days. So think about the concept of I totally fell off the wagon. I'm ashamed. versus, you know what, I had a vacation day and I'm backing back up. So some people work better with one option. Some people work better with the other. Andrew Wilkinson, Dr. Brewer, have you seen the study of berberine versus amiodarone for cardioversion from AFib and maintaining SR, sinus rhythm? I haven't, Andrew. That's very interesting. I will tell you, there's a lot of new research coming out about both berberine and bergamot. Andrew went on to say berberine is good and also shrank the left ventricle. We have a look, please. I will plan on doing that. I will warn you, like I mentioned before, we've got a lot of stuff going on with our travel right now with the Orlando event. D. Crispin, that death rate is a sobering fact. Yes, I didn't know what you were talking about. Yes, the death rate from heart attack and stroke. So here's the thing. Let me just add one other component to that. It's hidden. Not only, I mean, people are not they're not surprised when they find out that heart attack is the #1 killer. They've heard that before. They're also not surprised when they find out that stroke disables a lot of people, because most of us have met somebody like that. What they're surprised about is to find out their own level of risk. And let me just give you a couple of other statistics around that space. So what was it, 5-10 years ago, the CDC used to say, well, we've got 80 million adults, 1 in 3, that have prediabetes. And yes, prediabetes puts you at risk for heart attack and stroke. The other thing the CDC used to say was, well, 72 million, or 90% of those people, have no clue that they have prediabetes. Well, that was before 2 years ago, when UCLA came out and said, look, it's not 1 in 3, it's more than 1 in 2. And here's the other thing. So now the CDC is starting to say, actually, maybe those numbers were low. And all of these other people that we didn't know about, obviously they didn't know about it either. So it may be 125, it may be a lot of adults. And again, maybe it's not just 60-year-olds anymore. Like in California, on the UCLA study, age 30 and above, 1 in 2 probability of having prediabetes. And we wonder why our arteries get plaque. And we wonder why heart attack is the #1 cause of death and stroke is the #1 cause of permanent disability. Now, if you're thinking that I'm a nut, one of those crazy internet docs, let me just share one other thing. It was a New England Journal article about, gosh, I can't remember when it was. I'm going to be presenting some of that this Friday at Orlando. One of the questions is this. All of this is based on the assumption that having a high blood sugar on average puts you at risk for heart attack and stroke. Well, again, I actually started to pull that up because I still had it on my computer, but I closed out my other windows when I set up for this YouTube Live to help with the technical side. Again, a few years ago, article in the New England Journal, they looked at average blood glucose as indicated by hemoglobin A1C. And yes, as you got above 5.3, your probability of having a heart attack or stroke began to increase. Your probability of dying from a heart attack or stroke obviously began to increase. And the impact was so big that your probability of death from all causes, again, started increasing at 5.3 and above. Now, what is 5.3? What does that correlate to? About 105. So the reality is, if your blood sugar is averaging over 100 to 105 on a regular basis, you're increasing your probability of dying. Now, when you go back and you ask the question, from all causes, does that mean that causes death from other things? Well, yes, prediabetes does increase our risk for some other things like excuse me, like kidney disease. We know that by the time people have a diagnosis of full-blown type 2 diabetes, between 1/3 and 2/3 already have evidence of tissue damage, damage to their eyes, kidney damage, things like that. So yes, the death rates that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and we'll do an update. It's been 48 minutes since we started, 50 minutes. So that means there have been, what, 100 heart attacks and 50 deaths from heart attacks. And what, about 12 to 14 strokes, and 3 to 4 of them resulting in major permanent disability. So yes, thank you for bringing that back up, D. Crispin. And yes, this is a very sobering fact. And again, I don't mean to badmouth or criticize anybody who's interested in the coronavirus. It is very interesting, but I mean, people talk about, well, don't focus on the coronavirus. It's the flu here in the US killing us right now. Well, it's not the flu that's killing us either. We don't have those kind of death rates. We're just totally accustomed to the death rate associated with prediabetes and diabetes, which is causing 80 to 90% or more of heart attack and stroke. Thank you again for bringing that up. Deb Tingry, doubt I'm the first from Mexico. That's correct. You're not, Deb, but thank you very much, Deb, but thank you very much for attending. I started to say there was somebody a few weeks ago, but I think that might have been you. So you may have been the first from Mexico, and you might have been the first American expat in Mexico. Thank you very much for making us aware. Farouk Farr, I think you're from Farouk and a couple of other folks. I think we may have some folks in a clinic in the Middle East as well. Teb Tingry, glycerin. Yes, glycerin was what I was looking for. Glycerin is, for those of you who are saying, wait a minute, what's glycerin got to do with anything? You may remember I mentioned, we were talking about the Prolon diet, and glycerin is a part of the Prolon diet. In order to decrease bonking or just feeling bad, having brain fog, things like that, Walter Longo has added glycerin to the Prolon diet. So what he says is it gives you some glycerin in a small tube. He tells you to put that in a tea and drink that tea all day. So glycerin is keeping you from, again, having that bonk and helping make it easier for you to do that diet experience, trick your body into thinking that it's fasting. Question for the biochemists, why did he use glycerin instead of some of these others? Glycerin actually does have some calories coming from it. And even more so, your body makes glycerin. Triglyceride is fat, right? And triglyceride is 3 fatty acids that are linked together by a glycerin molecule. So as you're burning fat from using the Prolon diet, Prolon fasting mimicking diet, you're actually you're burning some of the fatty acids off and putting glycerin back into your metabolism from that triglyceride. Okay, OAG, Dr. Brewer, is LP little a the same as LP plaque 2? No, it isn't. LP little a is thank you, it's a good question. LP little a is a variation of LDL, what a lot of people are calling bad cholesterol. It's just one of the cholesterols that we look at, one of the cholesterol particles. LPPLA2 is an enzyme that shows that the body has cardiovascular plaque, cardiovascular inflammation going on. It's one of the actor enzymes in cardiovascular inflammation. Now, Bart Robinson, C. Lear, I call it a reward day for staying low carb all the other days. Well, great. That's clearly one way that you're doing it, and some others as well. We're headed up to the end of the hour. I'm going to blitz through, and if try to get out by the hour, because again, we get more replays on this than even we've got a lot of attendance today, a lot of interest, and I appreciate it. Over the next 24 hours or so, the YouTube algorithm will read this interest and put this out for a lot of folks. If we get beyond an hour, they start saying, dang, I don't know if I have the time to listen. So we'll try to cut it off within the next few minutes. Kazbach, I like the flush from niacin. Nice to see results. Rob T07, the nicotinamide riboside does not cause flush. Doc, do you know how much NR, nicotinamide riboside, is needed for the desired niacin effect? I don't remember. I used it for a while. I did a couple of videos on it. And don't remember if I mentioned the dosage in those videos or not, Rob, but thanks, that's a good question. Typical dose of NR is 300. Z50, Z6, Hi Doc, Florida. Kazbach, earlier on an after bypass surgery, I had a fritter on a cheat day. 3 days later, gout. Sugar plus grain plus vegetable oil equals metabolic mayhem. Well, we do, speaking of metabolic mayhem, I had a family member who never had gout before. She's in her 80s, and she developed gout recently. I happened to be visiting, and she had a refrigerator full of tangerines. She had bananas on the counter. She had dates in the refrigerator. She had apples, orange juice. And she said to me, she said, does fructose cause gout? Yes, it does. And I'm glad she got the message on that. Hopefully, she said, well, I'm eating fruits and fruit products all day long, eating or drinking them. And I said, yeah, well, that may have had something to do with why you've just now developed gout. We tend to see a lot of gout around Christmas and New Year's. For those of us who are in our baby boomer era, Christmas and New Year's used to be when we got tangerines and things like that. And fructose is very much the chemical structure of fructose is very much, it's very similar to some of the purines that are part of the problem with gout, some of the DNA material. Terry Dukes, a couple more quick ones and then we'll finish up. Terry Dukes, I can have a blood sugar around 100. After 20 minutes of HIT exercise, it drops to 85. You can't kick a moving, starts with an A, 3 letters. Yes, you can't. Now, it's an interesting thing though, Terry. A lot of people start to get an elevation, especially with HIT. I never got that. I know a lot of my patients did. I never got it until recently. About 6 months ago, I started getting elevation of 40 and 50 points, actually going up to the 140s, 150s when I went out doing HIT. It happens. For those of you who have that, don't think, you know what, I'm going to, that's bad for me because it's bumping my blood sugar up. That small amount of time that you do there is more than, the benefits are clearly worth the risk. The people that have significant risk are the folks that are eating, getting it from something that's in their stomach, in their intestines, and it takes hours to pass through. And meanwhile, their blood sugar is 150, 140, 180, and just staying there. People that are getting an elevation from an HIT, similar to dawn effect, you just don't get that much of an impact. So we are headed on out. Thank you very much for your interest today.
Oh,
and
Doc.
we will.
Yeah, before you go, yeah, sorry to cut you off. I'd just like to remind everyone that we actually still have a couple of slots or seats available at the Orlando event. You know, there might be people here that might be interested with that event in Orlando or nearby.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you mentioning that again. I did mention it early on, but you get some rollover and turnover in this as well. So
yeah.
we do have it available.
Yep.
A couple more seats. Thank you again. Thanks from Manchester, England. Thanks, Andrew Wilkinson. And thank you, Clyde. And we
You're
will
welcome.
talk.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.